Hi, and welcome back to another Saturday morning coffee episode of Alcove. I have my El Mexicano iced coffee with me, and today we have our first Saturday morning coffee guest, the very recent Dr. Martinet. She's here to talk science with us. She is not drinking coffee. Kristen, what are you drinking, and can you tell us about what your research was?
So, hello. Thank you for having me on the podcast. I'm drinking water today, very exotic. And so my dissertation research was basically two things. The first thing was about, biodiversity in island systems. And so I looked at species-area relationships for island systems for lizards, so specific genera of lizards. So genera is the plural of genus. And so I looked at Anolis, Phelsuma, and Amoya, and I looked at how non-native species are impacting their biodiversity using these relationships. Cool. And then the second part is about evolutionary video games, which is something that I'm going to be talking about with Michael today. And so with this research, I looked at this evolutionary video game called Project Hastur and figured out whether you could predict the kinds of aliens that evolved based on whatever strategy you're using.
Exciting stuff. And what is your doctorate in?
It's in bioinformatics and computational biology.
There you go. That's a mouthful.
Yeah.
All right. So first thing I want to do is I want to talk about a science news article that's close to home for both of us. It's from our alma mater. It's University of Idaho has a team that aims to revolutionize affordable housing with 3D printed homes. And so we've seen 3D printing come to be a thing very recently, but that 3D printing for homes that we've seen so far, that we see startups doing, is made with concrete. This one, they actually want to use wood, sawdust and other byproducts that come from the logging industry. And they want to turn that stuff into a bio-based glue for 3D printing both buildings and stackable bricks.
That sounds so cool.
It is really cool. And so this is actually a joint venture between the College of Art and Architecture and the College of Natural Resources. Seems like a perfect combination for this. But apparently, according to their research, 84 million tons of sawdust and waste are generated per year in the logging industry. So that's a lot of waste that could be used in various ways. And so currently, U of I does use it for heating up campus. They have these like little heat tunnels. You know about the heat tunnels?
Yeah, I know about the heat tunnels, but I didn't know it was used like logging byproducts were used for that. That's cool.
And so anytime you see those like trucks pull up behind that steam power plant, they're dumping off like all the waste that U of I is buying from like local sawmills and stuff, and then they burn that and other byproducts for generating heat through those tunnels that run underneath our campus to most of the older buildings and underneath a lot of the sidewalks.
Yeah.
Which is fantastic because it melts all that snow during the winter.
Yeah, it's so nice.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so my question for this is, how much of that 84 million pounds generated here in the U.S., how much of that could easily be like actually retrieved and then used? You know, it's kind of like when you put stuff in recycling, right? You can't, anything with like food waste on it, you can't reuse in the actual recycling process.
Yeah.
And so 84 million tons is a lot. And I mean, I would assume that any percentage that you could retrieve is, percentage that wouldn't be used otherwise, or, at least going somewhere. But I don't know, like it feels it's one of those things that sounds really good in theory, but how much could you have that to sustain that practice? And another thing is, not only do they have to figure out how to make this like bio glue, but I read that they also have to make a custom 3D printer that can actually handle the product. And so they're like, this team is facing a two-prong kind of challenge here.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I'm really excited about it. There's a really cool article and a podcast episode about it that I'll link in the link dump. One thing I would say also that I'm really excited about this is that it doesn't seem to encourage deforestation, which I'm really excited about because it's just using the byproduct of the industry. It wouldn't make any sense to, create a whole sawmill just for selling this stuff. So even better that we're using the waste. And the last thing is like, it's cheap now when they're just taking the byproduct, but once it starts making a lot of money, I'd be worried that's sawmills are going to charge more. And like one of the whole purposes behind this is the team recognizes that there's been this massive increase in cost for affordable, like there's not really affordable housing anymore. And so they're hoping that this project will actually like combat that and be able to provide cheaper housing. But I'm worried, like, if this becomes really popular and it's sold out and companies start using this, like, is it still going to be affordable housing, or is it going to be this kind of like bougie way to build a house and it's going to get expensive,
right.
you know?
I can't see 3D printed houses being bougie, honestly. Like there's a vibe about it that's not very bougie.
Well, neither are our shipping container homes, but
those became trendy.
Those became very trendy and very
true.
bougie, and people love them now. So there's that. But shipping container homes could have been a very good, I feel like, alternative to like pre-built trailer homes.
Sure, yeah.
I feel like those could have been a better option, but now they're probably so damn expensive.
Yeah.
So I hope that doesn't happen to this too.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I've always wondered too with these 3D printed houses about how they bear the elements, you know? Like if I imagine a 3D printed house in Florida, like that thing is gone probably. Yeah. I don't know. Like the sun, the weather, hurricanes, all this stuff. And so I feel like there's a sweet spot of like where in the country you can put these. Maybe Idaho is a good choice, honestly. But
yeah. I
guess
pretty
I'm
safe
curious
from all
about
natural disasters. So
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's what we had for 3D printing. Kristen, what is your first article you wanted to talk about this morning?
So this first article has a little bit of, I think, injected spite from me.
Okay.
And I wanted to mention it because I was looking at like academic Twitter, which is not always the best choice, but I was like, oh, maybe I can find like an interesting thing to talk about today. And I noticed there was this article from research.com that was like, oh, these are the top 100 best scientists. And I did mega air quotes just now.
Yeah, I'm sure there's all sorts of bias that went into this one.
Right. Yes. And so it was ranked based off of H index, which is essentially this metric it's so messed up. It's basically trying to figure out the productivity of every scientist by using the number of citations on their articles.
Oh.
And so the way that it's calculated, like, so I have an H index of 2. So I have, I don't know, 5 publications or something, and 2 of them have 2 or more citations. And so that's why my H index is 2, because 2 of them have 2 or more citations. If both of them had 3 or more citations, then my index would be, or sorry, if I had 3 with 3 more citations, then my H index would be 3.
Quick question then.
Yes.
Doesn't this really just like incentivize reusing whoever's just popular to begin with?
Exactly.
And so you're not really taking a look at new research because you know, you need to like rank up to be a more attractive candidate or you know, being able to stay relevant on your big fancy Ivy League campus.
Exactly. Yep. Yep.
Okay.
That's why it's so frustrating.
Like this at all.
It's awful. And people still use it for like hiring and things like that to see like how productive you are.
Yeah.
But there's so many better metrics to like figure out what good of a scientist you are rather than
like
this kind of stupid thing.
Your research.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's what they think H index is like calculating is the impact of your research, but really it's just favoring these like old people in Ivy Leagues who have like a bunch of, you know, they're the senior author on a bunch of papers and things like that. So super frustrating. But I wanted to mention it on your podcast specifically because Dr. Sally Byrne on Twitter, X, mentioned that so 1 in 10 of the top 100 best scientists from this article are named either Michael or Eric. So I thought that was funny and good to share with you. But only 3% are women, which sucks. So again, it shows like H index is such an awful metric for this kind of thing because there are so many amazing scientists who are women who are not represented in this kind of thing. So.
Does it talk about race at all? Like her tweet?
So the tweet did not. It was just talking about the
just gender.
Yeah, gender thing. Yeah. But I'm sure there's so many like so much research that could be done just on this one thing, this one list about how biased we are with our metrics of determining whether somebody is productive in the field or not.
Yeah, I feel like there are so many other ways, so many better ways than to count the number of references that your references have.
Yeah.
You know, I don't like that at all.
No.
Okay. I'm just not a fan of that. I do like that there's a lot of Michaels on there, although it does make me feel a little not so one in a million. But
One of the replies that I really thought was funny was, I forget who said it. I'm not going to be able to find it because I dug real deep. But they were like, maybe this is sarcasm, by the way. Maybe part of the problem is that not enough women are trying to change their name to Michael. And it's like, you're right. I don't want to change my name to Michael.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dr. Martinet, for that little anecdote. Okay, so this one is also, I'm very, very excited about this one. So this study began in 2020, and it determined that there is this like phonetic sperm whale alphabet.
Oh, that's so cool.
And I'm very excited about this. So it's unclear if the phonetic sounds are like actually language. They could actually be something more akin to like music rather than actual like a language. And so that's one of the big criticisms about this as we go through this is like, we shouldn't really apply this humanistic concept of language onto every animal just because it makes certain sounds in a certain way.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, that makes a lot of sense. But these sperm whales, they got thousands of recordings in the Caribbean of these sperm whales communicating, and they are kind of like these clicks somewhere between Morse code and a cracking door or a creaking door. And so each of these are, they call them codas, and they're between 3 and 40 clicks. And they vary based on like speed, tempo. There could be like decorator or ornamentation, they call them at the end. There's rhythm and there's all these things that go into how they can manipulate those 3 to 40 clicks into kind of like identifying some kind of language. And so they can't determine, like I said, if this is like really communication. And if it is communication, they also can't tell, are they speaking to the whale right beside them? Or are they speaking to the whale miles away?
Sure,
because that sound just goes and goes and goes in the ocean, right? And so there's all these like tons of questions that they're like, we don't know. So what they want to go from here is they are like 10xing their research on this. They've got a lot more microphones, and they're going to be following some of these sperm whales with drones to like kind of copy or trying to get like millions of hours of recordings to have all these data points. And then they're going to train an AI to like search through that data, because when they were originally trying to decipher the data, they had it was a team of biologists and computer scientists. And the biologists were like looking at this kind of like language, and like they weren't interpreting it. What ultimately gave this result, it was a computer scientist student at MIT who, I think she was the postdoctorate actually, who was like, I don't like the way that you're analyzing this data. It doesn't make sense. So she gave it a new data model and was able to see the data in a different way than what the biologists were. And then she was the one that went, oh, look at this. This is actually like a language. The computer is picking up more of these distinct sounds that we can't, like we're not actually realizing. And so she's the one that was able to decipher these codas. And so I thought this would be really relevant just because computational informatics and or bioinformatics. But they were able to identify 156 different codas by looking at the tempo, rhythm, ornamentation, and just like all the different variations of their clicks. And so yes, this AI thing, I feel like it's going to be really hard to train an AI to say, interpret this, but don't interpret it into a language, So we'll see. And I also really agree with this. You couldn't really force a language on a creature that might not actually be using language or communication methods as we know this. How do you feel about this? I'm really excited.
Well, I think it's so cool. Yeah. Something that AI and machine learning is really good at is identifying patterns. And so honestly, I think that this approach is going to be really good for this kind of thing.
Okay.
Even, depending on like what you want to call it, like language, song, whatever codas. I think the AI can still parse out like individual sections that are repeated for different reasons from different whales, like things like that. So I'm really excited about this approach and to see what they find. I want to hear it too. I want to hear the music.
I have the article pulled up.
Oh, cool.
And I can show you like some of the recorded clicks after we're done recording. So another thing I'm really excited about this is like I've been working on the language of some fantasy races that I've built for my like original D&D world, right? And one of the races is like these like descendants of water elementals. And so I was like listening to this and it just clicked. It's like, this is the perfect opportunity for me to come up with, I can use this as like a basis for their language. And so I'm going to like do a bunch of research on like all these different codas and then try to interpret that into a language for this race. And I'm super excited about it because I finally have like this like inspiration, because I take a lot of inspiration from like nature, like nature documentaries and stuff for like social systems and races in this fantasy world. That I've been working on this thing for really kind of my whole life, but really hard for like 10 years. And so I've already like started like writing out like some of these codas and stuff, like trying to interpret like how to assign like letters and sounds to them. So I'm really excited.
Well, okay. I'm imagining you sitting at the table like Dory, like, whoa, you know? But I'm sure it'll be more clicky than that. But
it is a lot more clicky than those are. What kind of whales are they? It's shoot.
Were they humpback whales?
I think it's humpback whales. Yeah. Anyways, that's why I'm really excited about this article.
That's so fun.
Your turn.
Okay, so the second thing that I had on my list was Project Hastur. So I mentioned it at the top of the show. So this is a video game that was developed in-house at the University of Idaho in the Polymorphic Game Studio. And so I worked with them to figure out whether you could determine the kinds of aliens that emerge when you're using certain strategies. So that's what I mentioned at the beginning. But to go back a little bit and like describe what Project Hastur is. So if you're familiar at all with video games, you might know about a tower defense video game. So the idea with these kinds of games is like there's little drones of enemies. In our case, they're called proteans. They're like funky aliens with these like crabby arms and stuff like that. They're super fun. And so they like come out of these burrows and you have to set up turrets, like automatically shooting guns to shoot at these things. And there's different kinds of guns that you can use. And there's strategy in like where you place them. And so wherever you place your turrets changes the behavior of the creatures that you're shooting at because they don't want to die, right? And the creature's goal is 1, to survive, and 2, to harm as many of your turrets as well as your bases as they can. And so you're trying to protect the bases and then the people at those bases from getting destroyed or eaten or whatever by the proteans. And there's some fun nuance in this game too. So like, if a protean gets a human, he doesn't just eat the human, he like I don't know how it works biologically. I'm not sure if they've decided this, but the end result is that once a human is gotten by a protean, the protean then clones itself. And so a bunch of little ones come out of this person that are exact clones of the ones that just killed the person. And so that's like an interesting evolutionary addition to the game, is like this idea of cloning. But we used experiment mode. So whenever you have this video game, it's on Steam, by the way, and it's for free. So if you search Project Hastur on Steam, then you'll be able to just download it and play it however you like. It's for Windows and Mac. And so when you're playing it as a researcher, you can use this experiment mode and you can decide like the effect size of the mutations that are happening in between waves. You can decide like what map you're using, your population size, things like that. And then you can also make it so that the turrets persist. So in regular gameplay, when the aliens are attacking the turrets, they go away. But in the experiment mode, you can choose to make them like invincible. And so you can see how these aliens evolve to combat these turrets in this like really stressful situation, like this huge selective pressure of like these turrets always being on. So it's super fun. I think it's really cool. It's like a game just to play because the aliens adapt to your strategies, right? This is an evolutionary video game. And so they'll know, oh, okay, so they put this autocannon turret here. I'm going to evolve, over generations, but still they're going to evolve to bypass that turret somehow. So in one of the examples that I put in the presentations I give about this game, is we have the autocannon that's like right next to a river. And typically a protean wouldn't be able to either jump or swim across that river,
Sure.
but they can evolve like the ability to swim through it or jump across it over generations. And so like on generation 1, it's just running in front of the turret and dying. But some of them are maybe like staying behind a little bit and like looking at the river longingly before they walk over and die. But then,
They're thinking about it.
Yep, they're thinking about it. And then over generations, because those survived longer, because they had this behavior of going towards the water, they eventually are able to either jump or swim across it. So like by generation 20 or so, and this is super fast, obviously, like in real life, it wouldn't work this way exactly. But in just a short amount of time, you can get these really interesting behaviors based on what the player is doing. So I think it's super fun. It's very cool.
Yeah. I've played the game. It is a lot of fun, and I've also seen I've been to some of your presentations and seen it and stuff, so highly recommend this game. As far as I wanted to make it, I had a note here when you were talking about when the creature, what was the alien race called again? Proteans.
Yeah.
When the Proteans were procreating like that. Have you ever played a game called Mass Effect?
No, I haven't played Mass Effect.
Okay. So in Mass Effect, there is a race called Asari, and they are the typical sci-fi blue aliens, but their method of procreation is this thing called melding, and so they don't actually have sex. What they do is they can meld, which is kind of like a I'm trying to describe it off the top of my head. But they kind of create this like electronic or this, I'm just going to pull this up real quick and I'm just going to describe it because there's a really good definition, and I'm going to connect this in just a second. So melding is the process by which an Asari can create a state of synchronicity between their nervous system and that of a partner. Melding allows participants to share thoughts, emotions, and experiences. The process also serves to map the genome of a partner, which serves as the catalyst for Asari conception. Now, there is this like rare genetic disease within Asari that makes them what's called an Ardat Yakshi. And these ones, when they do that melding process, they end up killing their partner. They kind of like fry their brain. And so that kind of reminded me of these Proteans, where they're using the human as like this vehicle for conception to give birth to new Proteans, but they're ended up killing them. And so there's just like this little bit of a similarity there.
Yeah,
that
that's interesting.
To draw a parallel to. So.
Yeah, well, it sounds like these creatures in Mass Effect are actually mixing their genomes, though.
Yeah.
Like with the Proteans, they're just cloning, but it is like a unique sort of way of creating new things for sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Something interesting too about, if we're on this topic about Protean reproduction, is that they reproduce sexually. So like they combine their genomes, like 50-50 split. At the end of a generation. So after all of them are dead. So it's kind of strange as a biologist to imagine this, because it's like, oh, it's like the ghosts of the Proteans are like creating the new generation. and the reason why it happens this way is because fitness can only be measured once they're dead, right? Because fitness is based on how long you survive and how much damage you do to the towers before you die.
Sure.
Right? And so that's just how it has to happen. But it's very strange to write about it in papers that way, because it's post-death copulation, I suppose.
Is there like a queen that is laying the eggs then?
No.
Oh, okay.
That would be fun though.
Yeah, because I was gonna say then maybe they're like all like they're all like what's the word? They're all like connected. Have you seen Ender's Game?
No.
Oh, shoot. Okay. I'm trying to pull these references to try and
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. What is the word when like all the species hive mind? Maybe they like have a hive mind and they're able to like transmit this data like upon death to the queen, who then uses it to lay eggs.
Yeah.
Nope.
I mean, we could say that.
I mean, you guys can absolutely retcon it. But there's a little idea. Just to make it a little more realistic. Realistic, big quotes there.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So this last one is a bee vaccine. So these scientists, and they had a hell of a time doing this study, because the beehives that they were studying kept getting destroyed, like whether it was bears or a hurricane in Florida, or just like this whole thing went belly up at this one bee farm. anyway, they had to redo the study a couple of times before they finally got to where they are now with this. This vaccine was developed to protect bees from a bacterial infection, but they found that when they tested the control group with the group getting the actual vaccine for this bacterial infection, they found that there was an 83% less virus rate in the vaccinated bees. And so it opened up all these questions about, well, how do bees' immune systems actually treat these diseases? Are they like more general? And so like we can just apply this vaccine for one thing, but it actually like affects a whole lot of things, and it doesn't have to be as specific. And so I just never really thought about bees getting vaccines before. But one of the main drivers for this is that pesticides, parasites, climate change, and nutritional stress have all made bees like more susceptible to infectious diseases. Yeah. And of course, we're all been very concerned about for the last, I don't know, what has been, I guess, a decade now that the kind of the language around bees has been like protect them at all cost. And so I just I'm really excited about this. This thing just made me laugh because I was thinking like when I was growing up, like if you saw a bee, you just killed it.
Oh, no.
You're like, get rid of an insect. But I feel like that kind of like the zeitgeist around it has changed to protect these bees at all costs. And so anyways, they're unsure about whether these protections can be passed on to the next generation. They don't really know if like why like their immune systems are like treating this like it, but the way that they are inoculated is through sugar paste. And so the bees will find the sugar paste and then take it, get from it what they need, take it back and mix it into the royal jelly. From there, the queens use that royal jelly, eat it, and then like the proteins latch on in their body, and then they deposit it into the eggs, and those new bees are the ones that are inoculated against these bacterial infections and the other viruses that it's been warding off. So anyways, that I just wanted to share because it's honeybees, and it's just I just wanted to bring up that it's funny that this like culture around bees has like shifted so much from when I was a kid. And I think this has some really cool potentials for like having far-reaching effects on agriculture in general. And so bringing back that bee population, like that's a significant 83% less virus. As long as it's not like a fluke, which they're like, listen, we got to redo the study a few times to make sure this is like actually like good to go. But the CDC gave like a provisionary like go ahead for this being used on bee farms. And so I think it's just really interesting to see like potentially see how healthier beehives, like this much healthier of a beehive, could end up affecting like our agriculture and bringing back more local plants in their areas.
Yeah, totally. One of my friends, her name is Wyva. She studies bee microbiomes, and so this sort of research is right up her alley. And so I feel very excited to share this information with her. I mean, she probably already knows, but she was telling me the other day about like how bees get their microbiomes. So like in humans, you get your microbiome like partially from your mom, but also just from like the environment and like what you eat and things like that. Well, the bees, like as larvae, they they have their microbiome that they have as babies, but then as they like turn into actual bees, like the bee itself is sterile when it turns into a bee, and then it eats the oh my gosh, I'm not going to get the right term, so I'm sorry, but like
I've messed it up so many times.
Whatever's in the comb that like seals the comb for it to be able to like metamorphose into an actual bee, like that stuff has like bacteria in it that it eats, and then it has its microbiome like as it emerges because it eats this thing. And it's just so cool. Like bee biology is so interesting, and I'm so glad that people aren't killing them anymore and that people love how cute they are, because they are so important to us, like especially.
And I think that big culture change is because people just didn't realize the importance that bees actually played on like local ecosystems until like the honeybee population is in danger. You guys need to understand why that's important. And then it was like, I remember it being a flip of a switch, you know, as a teenager, like, nope, protect the bees at all costs, you know?
Yeah.
To backtrack 1 second, what is a microbiome?
So a microbiome is basically like I don't know if family is the right word, but like an assemblage of a bacteria that lives in like your gut. So like your stomach and your like intestines and things like that help break down food. It also like protects against bad bacteria and things like that. So like there's a statistic that freaks people out, is that like you're more bacteria than you are human. Like there's more bacteria on you than there are human cells on you. But we love them. We need them because if you don't have a microbiome, if you don't have all these helpful bacteria in and on you, then you're getting attacked from all sides by the bad stuff like viruses and other like nasty bacteria and things like that. So it's super important to have a healthy microbiome so that you can continue surviving for sure. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's it for the bee vaccine. What do you got for your last article?
Okay. So for my last article, it's an actual literature article that I've been using to do some of my research recently.
Okay.
So it's by Stroud et al. And it's about anoles. So anoles, I have a soft spot in my heart for anoles because I grew up in Florida. And Florida has one species of native anole, and anoles are little lizards. And so it's this lizard that's green. It's called the green anole, Anolis carolinensis. And it's so cool. It's like sleek. It's got this like pointy nose, and it's got these toe pads with lamellae on them is what it's called. And so it allows them to like grip on surfaces and walk up and stuff. And so living in like a Florida suburb, you'll see them all over the place on palm trees, on oak trees, and on your lanais, which is like the screen covered thing that you put around your pool in Florida and other places too. But and so like I loved catching them like on the porch and on these trees and things like that. And so I became really fascinated with anole research. And so it's just really fun, like in my actual career, to come back to that sort of thing. And so I mentioned that I used anoles as a study system for my island biogeography work. But I'm also now using them to look at fitness landscapes. And so this is what Stroud did in their paper, is they used this community of anoles that live in Miami, actually. And they're mostly invasive anoles. So like they're anoles that have come on boats from like the Caribbean and the Greater Antilles Islands, like near there. And Cuba. And so like these anoles just live in Florida because they love the atmosphere, they love the habitat. And so they looked at these anoles that they have like different environmental needs. And so these are called ecomorphs. And so the anoles basically partition themselves on the trees and in their environment so that they're not competing with each other. And this isn't like super conscious or anything like that, but like each anole species has evolved to adapt to different parts of the tree so that they don't have like as much competition, right? And so there's crown giants. So they're big anoles with these huge toe pads so that they can walk on these large leaves at the top of trees. And then there's like Anolis sagrii, the brown anole, which is like a trunk ground anole. So it's got a little bit shorter legs. It's kind of smaller so that I can like run up and down like from the ground to the tree and back and forth and like that. And then there's twig anoles that have like super short arms so that they can grab onto twigs and like scuttle around like that. And usually they're kind of pointy looking too, so they kind of look like twigs. Do they scuttle around like on their hind legs then? And then just like... No, all four legs. Like
okay.
They're very cute. I love them. And so there's like these different ecomorphs of anoles. And so this paper looks at, I believe it's 4 or 5 of these anoles. Of each of them has a different ecomorph. And they created what's called a fitness landscape. And so it's more of a metaphor to show how these animals are evolving in their space. And so it's a way for humans to visualize how the traits, like the phenotypes and genotypes of these lizards are changing so that they can be optimized essentially for their environment. And so we visualize them as kind of like in 3D space as like peaks and valleys. And so on a peak, you're like super optimized for your space. You're adapted like completely for where you're living. And then in a valley, you're kind of poopy at it. Like you probably should like change something in your genome so that you can move up to this peak, right? And there are things that are like local optima, which is like, it seems like a peak when you're there, but maybe right next to you, you don't even know it's like a taller peak of like a better like fitness. So like you could optimize better, but because you're on this peak, you're kind of stuck. Because if you wanted to get to this next peak, you might have to go through a valley, which would be less fit than somebody who's already on this local optima. And so there's a lot of like nuance with these sort of fitness landscape things. But I'm creating them using Stroud's methods for Project Hastur to see what the fitness landscape looks like in our video game, to see like if the different strategies are changing the landscapes at all of like what these aliens are traversing with their genomes to become more fit or not.
It all comes back to Project Hastur.
It does, yes.
And those proteins. Oh. Wow. Well, that was an in-depth science talk. I don't even know what to say about that research other than it's really interesting. Yeah, I don't know what to say to that.
Okay, well, I have a question for you though.
Okay.
Did any of that make any sense? I feel like I have a really hard time explaining this fitness landscape thing.
I think it did.
Okay. Cool.
Could I repeat it back to you? I don't think so.
Yeah.
I also have this real tough time when I like get to talking about like coding stuff and like technical stuff at work, where like sometimes it's really hard for me to like put it in a way that a non-technical person would know. Like you think you're like, okay, this is like, I'm already explaining it at like the entry level, but again, that entry level is for people that are already like in that field.
Right. Yeah.
So and I think that's also one of the biggest plagues for science is that science is so often communicated in a way that's for science people and not for the average person. Yeah. And so I've heard I've seen quite a few TED Talks where people talk about like this is one of the biggest challenges for scientists is finding a way to actually communicate these topics in a way for like a general audience.
Right. Yeah. I was at a lab meeting recently with the game studio, and my supervisor was like, "Okay, tell us what you're doing," and I was like, "Okay." And so I just gave them all the technical stuff because we're all scientists in the room, right?
Sure.
But like we're not all the same kind of scientists, and so my supervisor Barry was like, "Did anybody understand that?"
Oh no!
And then one of my coworkers raised her hand, and she was like, I think I know less about what you're doing now than I did before. And I was like, no. So I need to work on like how to describe it. I think the maybe the most entry level way to describe a fitness landscape is like a way for humans to understand like and visualize how animals are like adapting to the environment or how anything is adapting, right? And so like a peak is that optimal, and then the valley is like the oh no, this is bad kind of zone where it's not optimal and your fitness is probably going to be lower, right? And then fitness is like how much offspring you produce essentially. Okay. And so if you live long enough, if you're adapted well enough to your environment, then you can create more offspring, which means you're more fit and your genetics are moving towards like through the population over time, over generations, more than other ones. And so that's what we're interested in is like what genetics create the most like adapted and most optimal like body form in these proteins, in these anoles, whatever.
Got it.
So
okay. That perfect.
Great. Perfect.
That was far easier to understand. So got it now.
Yeah.
But I got the base level of it.
If you read the Stroud paper, you can see these really cool visualizations of these fitness landscapes. They're like a heat map, like 3D peaks and valleys. They look like mountain ranges. Very cool. And they have the different anole species like on each peak. And so you can see like what genetics, or in this case, they were looking at morphology, which is like measuring things about their body. So like their face shape and like their lamellae and like things like that. So, yeah.
What brought you into, like, what made you interested in this science? Why did you pursue it?
That's an interesting question. So in undergrad, I was a biology major, just plain and simple biology. I always loved reptiles. And so I was trained as a field herpetologist in undergrad. So that's somebody who studies reptiles and amphibians as a herpetologist. And so I studied turtles and tortoises, but my love was always lizards, like I mentioned. But it doesn't matter like what you study as long as, so I was interested in life history stuff. So like, how long do these things live? Like how far do they move in their lifetime? Like where do they lay their eggs? Things like that. So like things that will be useful in like a conservation context.
Sure.
Then I took some computer science classes, and I was like, ooh, I love this programming thing. It's so fun. Like, I'm starting to get good at it, and I want to do it more. And so I started doing mostly computer science stuff in my last couple of years of undergrad. And so when I went to look for grad schools, because I always knew that I wanted to get a PhD, I used to want to be a paleontologist.
Ooh,
and so, like, I wanted to still pursue that idea, but maybe, like, with more living things, like, in the now instead of in the past. And so I was looking at programs that combined herpetology and computer science in some way. Like, I was kind of lost about how to do that, but I found that at the University of Idaho, Luke Harmon was really good at, like, combining those two things. And so I joined his lab and started working on this island biogeography stuff. And with that work, I was able to create an R package. Like, I programmed an R package, and R is a statistical programming language. And so a package is kind of like a bunch of methods that somebody writes that you can load, like any user can load and use your methods and like do the analysis that you've created. And so I wrote that. So it combined, like, I love programming, so I programmed this thing, and then I also love, biology, and so I programmed this thing to help with biological analyses. So that was like a perfect combination. And then I started working with the game studio, which is like evolution and video games. And so again, it's like biology and computer science all together.
Get to marry all your favorite subjects.
Yep.
I love that.
Yeah. And I'm a huge gamer, but mostly Nintendo stuff, as you've heard. So yeah, I think that's my journey, and that's how I got to where I am today. So,
okay.
Yeah.
It's exciting. And going on from here, you're going to Arizona,
yes,
right?
Yeah.
To do more research, but you don't know what yet.
So my plan right now, my research position is going to be a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Arizona's School of Information. They call it the I School because they're cool like that. And so my proposal when I applied for this position was to add speciation to my R package that I was talking about. So right now it just does species area relationships. So it displays the relationship between the number of species and then the area on which they live, like an island system. But something that might be interesting too is adding like speciation rates. But this speciation rate literature is a little bit there's a lot of parts to it that are like super complex, and if you don't do it right, then the head, like the old guard of this sort of field is going to be real angry at you.
Okay.
And so I wanted somebody who was like fresh and excited about this kind of, or I wanted to work with somebody who was fresh and excited about this kind of work. And so that's what I proposed for my postdoc. But the lab that I'm going into has a bunch of different like research going on all at once, all the time. And so master's students will finish their projects in this lab very often because of the cool environment of like all this different kinds of data that everybody's analyzing at the same time with like these data science sort of procedures and things like that. And so I think the thing that I'm most excited about is being in an environment where people are using all different kinds of data to do all different kinds of things. I think that that's the kind of environment that I want to be in ultimately for my big people job. So
and it's just an incredible chance to just continually be exposed to like new research, new ideas, new concepts. It sounds like a dream.
Totally.
I love it.
Yeah.
That's all very exciting. We'll have to keep in contact after you move.
Yes,
you're sadly
definitely.
moving away very soon.
Yeah.
And if there's any kind of new exciting developments, we'll have to catch up too for this stuff. So
yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Kristen, or Dr. Martinet, for taking the time to sit down with me this morning and talk science. Always exciting when I get that opportunity. That's it for this morning. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Alcove.
Sweet. Thanks for having me. Bye.